Hey everyone, David Shapiro here with another video. We're going to talk boundaries and consent with GPT-3. I'm trying a new format of video where I use GPT-3 as a way to help teach things that I want to teach the world, but also at the same time I'll teach you how to use GPT-3. Okay, what is the definition of a boundary? Let's see what it says. A boundary is a line that marks the limits of an area. Okay, that's a boundary. Let's change this to say personal boundary. What is a personal boundary? Is thinking. A personal boundary is a line that delineates what is and is not acceptable in terms of physical and emotional intimacy. Perfect. Okay, I like that. What is the definition of consent? Consent is an agreement between two people to engage in sexual activity. Okay. What is the, let's say, full definition of consent? Okay, it has clearly been contaminated by the previous thing. So let's see, consent is voluntary, enthusiastic, and ongoing agreement to engage in sexual activity. It is important to remember that consent can be withdrawn at any time. Okay, this is all true, but this is not the full definition of consent. So let's remove that, and I'll show you how what was above it. The full definition is agreement to do something. See how the definition changes drastically? So let me copy that and then go back a little bit. Oh, it doesn't require, keep it. Okay, so anyways, you can see that what you write beforehand changes the next output. Okay, write a formal definition of consent. Okay, yeah, consent is an agreement to do something. It is given voluntarily and with knowledge of what is being agreed to. Okay, cool. That is a good broad definition of consent. Write a formal definition of a personal boundary. A personal boundary is a line that separates one person from another. It is a limit on how close one person can get physically or emotionally. Great. Okay. Write a summary of the book. Let's see, write a brief summary of the book, The Power of a Positive No by William Ury. Let's see, in The Power of a Positive No, William Ury provides readers with a 7-step process for saying no effectively. He argues that the ability to say no is a critical skill for anyone who wants to be successful in life. Ury offers readers specific strategies for handling difficult conversations, setting boundaries, and maintaining relationships. The book also includes case studies and real-world examples to illustrate the principles Ury discusses. Okay, yeah, I would say that's fine. The only thing is that I don't necessarily agree with the 7-step process because he actually outlines a 3-step process, which is yes, no, yes. Explain Ury's yes, no, yes method for establishing boundaries. Let's see. It involves saying no to a request, but then following up with a positive response. For example, if someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, you can say no, but then offer an alternative suggestion. Yes, that is correct. This method can be used to maintain relationships while setting clear boundaries. Perfect. Okay, so taking a big step back. We defined boundaries earlier as a line that should not be crossed. And then we also defined consent as something that is agreed to. Why is consent important in work relationships? Let's see. Consent is important in work relationships because it establishes a clear and mutual understanding of expectations, roles, and boundaries. It helps to prevent misunderstandings and can make communication and collaboration more efficient and effective. When all parties involved in a work relationship have given their consent, it can help create a more positive and productive work environment. Yes, 100%. I think that everyone in any kind of professional capacity should understand consent. That's me personally. How does this relate to consensus? So this is something that I use both in my personal life and in my work life. Whenever I'm conducting a meeting, I don't ever tell people this is the conclusion, agree with me. I ask people what they believe and why, and we work towards consensus. I'm always open to being wrong. Now, more often than not, I come into a meeting with some preconceived ideas and we talk through it. And sometimes, the group comes to consensus that my idea was right. Sometimes that's not always true, though. Sometimes I go into a meeting and I say, I have no clue what I'm doing. So anyways, let's see how consent and consensus are related. Consensus is a process of reaching agreement between different parties. In order to achieve consensus, all parties involved must be willing to compromise and negotiate. This process can be difficult, but it is important in work relationships in order to ensure that everyone is on the same page and everyone agrees with the final decision. So consent and consensus have a very similar meaning. Let's say, compare and contrast the words consent and consensus. Consensus. Explore their etymologies and roots, as well as their colloquial usage and everyday and semantic meanings. It's thinking. The word consent comes from the Latin word consentire, which means to feel together. The word consensus comes from the Latin word consensum, which means agreement. Both words are used to refer to a situation in which two or more parties agree on something. However, consent is often used to refer to a situation where one party agrees to do something, while consensus is often used to refer to a situation where all parties have involved, which all parties involved agree to do something. Yes, so the implication there is consent is often between two parties, whereas consensus is between many parties. Again, I don't know if that's perfect, but it did a really good job doing this very quickly. Let's see. How might the issue of consent come up between romantic partners in a non-sexual context? What are some examples where a couple may need to discuss consent? Okay, so one example might be if one partner wants to move in together and the other partner is not sure if they are ready. Another example might be if one partner wants to have a child and the other partner is not sure if they are ready. Yeah, you consent to, live together. You consent to have a child. Those are really important things to talk about and consent to. Because remember, one of the definitions of consent is an informed agreement. Let's see. What are some examples where consent might be important between friends and other, I'll just say friends. Friends or social groups. Okay, so it says one example is one person wants to borrow money and the other is not comfortable with it. Another example might be if one friend wants to share a secret with another friend and the other friend is not sure if they're ready to hear it. Yes, so that's a perfect example. So I have a personal policy. I say if you do not want, if it's a secret, do not tell me. I don't want to know because I don't want the burden of keeping someone's secret. I don't consent to hearing someone's secret. This is perfect. I had no idea it would come up with this, but this actually touches on a personal policy that I have. Okay, so that's consent between romantic partners and friends or social groups. I had another idea. What was it? Something consent between, oh, good grief. Okay, well, anyways, you're starting to get the idea. Oh, family members. That's what it was. Finally, what are some examples where consent comes into play between family members? There are many examples where consent comes into comes between family members. One might be when a sibling wants to borrow money. Okay, it's just copying itself. Another example might be if one parent wants to discipline their child in a certain way and the other parent doesn't want to. That is perfect. Okay, so taking a big step back, What are the difficulties with consent? Why is consent hard at times? Let's see what it says. There are many difficulties that can arise with consent, especially when it comes to sexual activity. The biggest difficulty is one person is significantly more intoxicated than the other. Okay, so it's defaulting to sexual consent. That's not what I meant. Let's see. Let's start by just defining consent. Or let's say with consent between, at work. Let's see. Yes. One reason why consent can be hard at times is because people feel like they have to do something to keep their job or to please their boss. Exactly. Conflicting interests. Another reason why consent can be difficult is because people may not want to say no or be seen as difficult. Yes, this is particularly true in some cultures, like Japan. I just watched a video called, what was it? Let's Ask Shogo. Great video. I'll link it in the comments or in the description. Where he talks about how Japanese culture is very collectivist, and they're conditioned not to stand out. Additionally, people may feel pressure to do something because their colleagues are doing it. Lastly, people may not be aware of what they are consenting to, or they may not understand the consequences of their actions. Again, these are all great reasons why consent can be difficult. What I was hoping that it would get to is that the contents of one person's mind might be different from another. But I guess it does say like they might not understand the consequences of their action. What about miscommunications? How does that affect consent? Miscommunications can definitely affect consent. If someone is not clear about what they are consenting to, they may end up doing something they don't want to do, or they are not fully aware of the consequences. Additionally, miscommunications could lead to people feeling like they have to do something because they misunderstood what was being asked of them. And then in worst cases, you can be actively misled. So misleading someone violates their consent. Misleading is a form of lying or misdirection or whatever. What are some protocols or communication techniques? Can I spell right now? Techniques. There we go. Techniques that can be used to discuss and establish consent. Some protocols or communication techniques can include, let's see. Ooh, that's a lot. Asking for consent that can be construed for anything sexual, making it clear that consent can be withdrawn at any time, using clear and concise language when asking for consent, checking in to make sure they're comfortable, respecting other people's boundaries. Yes, remember boundaries. Listening to the other person's concerns and taking them seriously, being aware of the other person's body language and nonverbal cues, making sure that both parties are okay. So it's defaulting back to sexual consent. So this is one case where GPT-3 is very deeply colored by its training data, which is a lot of internet data. So here I'm talking about consent at work, and then the implication is we should still talk about consent at work, but it changes topic to sexual consent. Let's see. What is the definition of interpersonal boundaries? Let's see. Write a long, thorough definition. Interpersonal boundaries are the limits we set on other people in our lives, defining what is and is not acceptable in terms of physical, emotional, and mental intimacy. They vary from person to person and can change over time depending on our relationships and experiences. Wonderful. Perfect. Setting and maintaining healthy boundaries is an important part of self-care and can help us to protect from emotional and physical harm. It can also foster respect, trust, and communication. That is true. There was a psychology study that I read years ago that said that actually establishing boundaries increases people's respect for you. If you tell someone no and stand your ground, it actually means that it teaches them that they can't walk all over you and they actually respect you more. Okay, when our boundaries are, Did not mean to do that. When our boundaries are violated, we may feel violated, disrespected, or unsafe. Unsafe. Safety is critical. Safety is a huge component. That is the underlying need for boundaries and consent. We may also struggle to assert ourselves and set our limits with others. Learning to set and respect personal boundaries is a key part of healthy development. It can be helpful to talk to a therapist or counselor if you are struggling to set boundaries in your life. Personally, I read books, but yes, if you talk to a mental health professional or a life coach about boundaries, that would be great. Okay. Give some hypothetical, let's see, imagine. So if you use more specific words, GPT-3 really picks up on it. So like if I say like give hypothetical examples, it will like give a list. But if I say imagine some scenarios, some fictional scenarios where boundaries are being ignored or violated, come up with a parable. One day, a young woman named Sarah went to visit her friend Jane. Jane was happy to see Sarah and welcomed her into her home. However, Sarah did not reciprocate Jane's enthusiasm. She stood in the doorway, not moving to come inside. Jane asked Sarah if she was okay, but Sarah just stood there, not saying a word. This is a weird story. Jane began to feel uncomfortable and asked Sarah again if she was sure she was okay. Sarah still did not respond. Jane then decided to respect Sarah's boundary and stepped back, allowing her to enter the house if she wanted to. Oh, interesting. Okay, so by inaction, Sarah did not give consent, or she silently established a boundary. Okay, I see what it's trying to say. Sarah finally came inside, but she did not speak or make eye contact with Jane. Jane felt confused and hurt by Sarah's behavior. It's important to respect other people's boundaries, even if we don't understand them. Wow, this is a great story. I'm really happy with this. If we don't, we risk making them feel disrespected, violated, or unsafe. This is a really great parable. Let's see. Let's delete that and start again. It should come up with something entirely different. I was at the park with my young daughter when a strange man came up to us and started talking to us. I didn't feel comfortable with him being so close to us, but I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't say anything. Uh-oh. Let's see. It looks like it gets bad. Didn't feel comfortable with him being so close, so I didn't say anything. He ended up following us home, so I had to call the police to get him to leave. I was at a party with my friends, and I got really drunk. I started making out with this guy I didn't know very well and ended up going home with him. I regretted it the next day when I woke up hungover and realized I had no idea what his name was or where he lived. Boundaries, again, typically turns sexual. Let's see. Let's do this between family members. And also, I will just compress this. This was the previous thing, just kind of condense it into one paragraph. Using vertical, quick lesson about GPT-3. Using vertical white space is a really good way of telling GPT-3 where boundaries are between instructions. So speaking of boundaries. Okay, imagine some fictional scenarios where boundaries are being ignored or violated between family members. Actually, let's say by family members. Come up with a parable. Mary is always asking her grown daughter for personal questions about her love life, even though she knows her daughter is not comfortable discussing such things. This violates her daughter's boundary for privacy. Excellent. John's parents always show up unannounced at his apartment. Oh man, if you read Reddit, this happens so often. Even though he has asked them to call first, this violates his boundary of independence. Jane's sister always borrows her clothes without asking, even though Jane has told her not to. Tim's brother always uses his computer without his permission, even though Tim has asked him not to. Okay. So yeah, ownership, property, independence, and privacy, all different kinds of boundaries that you can have. This is really great. And it also teaches the importance of boundaries. I'm actually satisfied with this. I think that GPT-3 has demonstrated a really good understanding of consent and boundaries, although it is a little bit frustrating that it defaults to sexual consent and sexual boundaries. Consent and boundaries apply to everything in life. So I hope that future training sets understand that and that GPT-3 develops a more nuanced understanding. But still, with the correct prompts, it seems like it can handle boundaries and consent perfectly fine. Thanks for watching.